Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Hena Zuberi, and I'm the director for the DC Office of Justice for All. Our campaign, Burma Task Force, has organized this conference today, and today, this is the last session of the day. It's the final session for the conference, and we are going to be now discussing challenges and signs of hope, possible roadmaps for Rohingya advocates. Throughout the day, we've been discussing building partnership, building solidarity, taking a close look at needs in Rakhine State, as well as needs in Bangladesh during the COVID-19 crisis. We've also spoken to commissioners from the United States Commission of International Religious Freedom, as well as Rohingya leadership from the ground in the UK, in Malaysia. And wrapping it all up will be our amazing panelists that we are welcoming to the panel today. So my first panelist that I'd like to introduce all of you to is Schwe Maung. Schwe Maung is a Rohingya rights activist and a politician who has served as a member of parliament in the House of Representatives for the Butindong constituency between 2011 and 2016. In Parliament, Schwe Maung consistently and tenaciously fought for the Rohingya people. Currently, Schwe Maung serves as the board of members of the Asian Parliamentarians for Human Rights, APHR, and is the founding member of the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief, as well as the president of the Arakan Institute of Peace and Development. Schwe Maung has previously consulted with former US Presidents Barack Obama and Jimmy Carter in Yangon to discuss the Rohingya genocide. In addition, Schwe Maung is a 1995 recipient of the UNESCO Peace Prize. He's a mechanical engineer by profession from the Yangon Institute of Technology and has been working as a Rohingya activist now based in the United States. Thank you so much for being here, Schwe Maung.
You're very welcome, Sister Hena. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, Minglawa. I feel very honored to speak at this very important event of genocide and war crimes in Burma. We are also remembering third anniversary of genocide against Rohingya. Today, I would like to talk about Myanmar upcoming election on November 8, 2020. In terms of Rohingya crisis, the election in 2015 and upcoming one in November 2020 are not only political issue, but also connected with genocide against Rohingya. I served at Myanmar Union Parliament from 2010 to 2015 by representing persecuted minority Rohingya from my constituency of Butindong Township of Arakan State. I personally witnessed genocide in 2012, and I outcry for the full-fledged citizenship of Rohingya community, as well as justice for the crimes against humanity and peaceful coexistence among between Rakhine and Rohingya inside Parliament and outside Parliament. In January 2014, a fire broke out at Duchiaden village of Maung, south of Arakan State of Burma, which destroyed 16 homes and killed a number of people. In that regard, I criticize about the fire broke out under the control of local police, according to eyewitness called me over the phone. In this regard, former President U Thein Sein sent an arrest warrant to the Speaker of the Union Parliament for me, for my criticism to the Democratic Voice of Burma. So the case is still open, at the Myanmar police force in Burma. And then in 2015, the president thinks in revoke temporary ID cards and did not order Immigration Department to issue citizenship cards according to 1951 Resident Registration Act and 1982 Citizenship Law. Instead, Immigration Department introduced and issue so-called National Verification Card, NVC card, which is illegal as per existing law. President U Thein Sein government violated existing laws, and the Union of Myanmar Constitutional Tribunal ruled out that temporary card holders are ineligible to vote, despite these cards are only issued to the citizen by law. And then the parliamentary election laws were amended. In this connection, more than 1 million Rohingya were disenfranchised in 2015 general election, first time in Myanmar history. Rohingya and other Muslim MP candidates were not allowed to contest in the election. For myself, being a sitting member of parliament, I was denied to run for my office again by accusing my both parents were not citizens when I was born. In fact, it was bogus and laughable because my father was a retired police officer and my parents are senior citizens of Myanmar. After that, I was invited to brief human rights situation of Rohingya and then election status at the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission of the House at the Capitol Hill in September 2015. After the briefing, Voice of America Burmese section interviewed me, and I told that 2015 election would be unfree and unfair as 1 million Rohingya and their MP candidates are disenfranchised. For this comment, former Myanmar President Office sent another letter to the Speaker of the Union Parliament, Schwe, to take action against me. Can you imagine how serious it is? Since then, I remain in United States. Again, on August 27, 2017, I requested Myanmar government leaders through my Facebook page live to protect and save innocent Rohingya from extrajudicial killing by local security forces. Myanmar police force opened a police case against me under counter-terrorism law instead of stopping killing of innocent people. It is so serious and very shocking. So because of my request, sincere request to the Myanmar State Councilor and Myanmar military chief, so they responded my request as extrajudicial killing to the innocent people, although I requested to protect them. So finally, because of that genocide against Rohingya happened in 2017, 1 million Rohingya were expelled from their homeland to neighboring country Bangladesh, and several thousands of Rohingya were killed, several hundreds of homes and villages were destroyed. So as we all are aware, now Myanmar government is facing genocide case at ICJ, also deportation of Rohingya case at ICC, and then IIMM has been investigating and preparing files to charge Myanmar government at the International Tribunal, National Tribunal, or where appropriate. So when we talk about this forthcoming election in 2020, still Rohingyas are not included in the voters list of forthcoming election. And a number of MP candidates from the Democratic and Human Rights Party and National Democratic Party for Development, these are two Rohingya party. Representatives from their parties, we have submitted their paperwork to the relevant district election commission, but they are waiting what the decision will be. It looks like these all Rohingya MP candidate may be rejected again like 2015 because they are not recognizing our Rohingya as a citizen. Therefore, they don't want our Rohingya MP candidates in the forthcoming election. It happened 2015 under the USDB administration. But now, this is NLD administration led by Aung San Suu Kyi. But it looks like still the same policy. What they disenfranchised Rohingya from the election in 2015 are not by law, but by policy. But NLD administrations, looks like they are still same policy. Therefore, I would like to request United States government, United States Congress, and the whole international community to give enough pressure to the government of Myanmar so that Myanmar government will allow Rohingyas to vote and to be elected in forthcoming general election on November 8, 2020. Also, as a conclusion, I would like to thank the minority ethnic leader of Burma, as we had a roundtable meeting yesterday. All major ethnic minority leaders were there, from Rakhine, Karen, Kachin, and Rohingya as well. So we, in principle, we agree to form a network so that we can move forward together. We can speak for each other together. We can advocate and we can advance our rights together, not separately, by a collective way. So for that, I really appreciate. At the same time, I would like to request the citizens of Myanmar inside the Myanmar, so please share the pain of a persecuted ethnic by others. When Rakhine people have pain, we need to share. When we have pain, Rakhines, Karen, Chin, Shan, and other ethnics should share. So in that way, we can fight for our human rights and we can advance our advocacy so that all ethnics of Burma, we can live in our ancestral land peacefully. So this is my message for my fellow citizens in Myanmar. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maung, for that. And we hope that we can take up the discussion after the presentations are over on elections in Burma. Next, I'd like to invite Andrea Gilman from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Andrea will be sharing just an immense amount of work that the museum has been doing towards highlighting this genocide. She is the program manager for the Simons, I hope I pronounced this right, Scott Center for the Prevention of Genocide, where she focuses on policy outreach, justice, and accountability efforts for mass atrocities, and leads the center's work on Burma, otherwise known as Myanmar. Previously, she was the interim director of U.S. policy and senior legislative counsel at Physicians for Human Rights, where she designed advocacy and policy strategies on a broad range of international human rights issues, including mass atrocities. Prior to that, she served as the Arthur Helton Global Human Rights Fellow with the Burma Lawyers Council in Thailand, where she coordinated an international advocacy campaign for criminal accountability in Burma. She's also worked with the new NYU Immigrants' Right Clinic, Legal Momentum, as well as other, and she was a Peace Corps volunteer. So thank you so much, Andrea, for joining us. It's wonderful to hear from you with your breadth of experience on the Burma issue. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the organizers and to my fellow panelists. It's an honor to be here with you, and thank you for that very kind introduction. I'll just speak briefly about some of the work that the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum has been doing on this case. And I'll focus in particular on a new online exhibition that we launched in May of this year. I think it's something that can serve as an educational tool for policymakers and for the general public. So to give a sense of the museum's past work, starting in about 2013, the museum started calling attention to what it then called early warning signs of genocide, having public programs, research, investigations, and the like into specifically the treatment of the Rohingya community within Burma or Myanmar. We worked with organizations, including fellow panelists who worked with Fortify Rights to issue a report several years ago that looked at mounting evidence of genocide, and the Holocaust Museum in 2018 determined that given the situation, given the facts and the definition of the law, that a genocide had occurred against the Rohingya people. One particular project we're looking at now is what genocide prevention could look like in a practical sense. So Myanmar, Burma has the obligation to prevent genocide, and we are putting out some very clear standards and some benchmarks for what genocide prevention would look like. If the government were to seriously prevent future acts of genocide against the Rohingya population and others, what specific steps could they approach? And it would be incumbent upon the United States, but really many other countries, to make sure that the Burmese government adheres to those obligations and all of those steps. So I'll speak in a little bit more detail about the online exhibition that we launched earlier this spring. As you know, the Holocaust Museum as a museum is an educational resource. And we wanted to, in particular, focus on the Rohingya genocide and make sure that people who come to our museum, either the physical space or to the website, to learn about the history of the Holocaust, can also learn that genocide continues today. We wanted to share the stories and experiences directly from Rohingya people, but we also wanted to make sure that we were reaching an audience that perhaps has never heard of Burma or Myanmar, perhaps does not know anything about the Rohingya community or what they have faced. So we wanted to make sure that we had an experience that was very genuine and accurate, but also reached a broad audience and educated them about this important issue. We started by asking some museum visitors what they knew about the situation, and many people really were not familiar with the Rohingya at all, with the history, with the context. Some people might have been a bit familiar about the country, but really we were trying to reach an audience that had little background information, but really a sincere interest in learning more. From the people we talked to, there still was this sense that people understood genocide is not one event. It's not a singular act of violence. It's rather a long process that takes time. It takes many people in order for such a crime to be committed. So we wanted that to be one of the main themes that came across in the exhibition. So we wanted to focus on the process of genocide, all of the early warning signs that so many people throughout this conference have been documenting, to make sure that we focus not only on the most extreme physical acts of violence that often make headlines, but also that long process of deteriorating a community, their rights, their standing, et cetera, because all of that is an important part of understanding what the Rohingya community has experienced. We also wanted to show what Rohingya life was like before the genocide and what it was like after, that a community is not only defined by one event, by something that happened to them, but we wanted just to show what was lost and what remains. So I'm going to show my screen just to give a sense of of this exhibit. So I hope you can see this here. This is part of the exhibit, which is called Burma's Path to Genocide. And when you scroll down, you can see that the exhibition is mostly broken into two segments. One is about the history of persecution, and one has specific stories from Rohingya people. All of the stories are from the village of Maung, which is where a massacre took place. People who were related to each other, who knew each other, etc. So if you go to the history, just to explore this a little bit with you, I encourage everybody to take a look on your own, but just to give you a sense. From these 5 chapters, you can kind of get a sense of the trajectory of the narrative. So we go from belonging to targeted to weakened to destroyed and then surviving. So that tells more of the history than you would often see in a news article or in a short video clip. So we wanted to capture the breadth of the experience. If you then go to the personal stories and then scroll down, here we go. So there are 6 stories of 9 individuals total, and each one I would say is quite powerful and harrowing, where we have the voices of people explaining what has happened to them. Because I think often when we hear about genocide, we hear about mass atrocities, the numbers can be a little bit numbing. So understanding the thousands killed, the hundreds of thousands forced to flee, having the very specific individual personal stories, I think helps people who might not be familiar with the context to have those kinds of connections and understand what has happened. And then you multiply that harm, that loss by the hundreds of thousands of people who have been impacted by this. So here, for example, is a story of Muhammad who's telling the story of his family. We worked with a photographer and curator, Greg Constantine, to put this together. So I'll stop sharing now, that was just to give you a sense of it, but I encourage everybody to kind of explore more of the exhibit on your own. We will have a physical exhibition that mirrors the stories and the elements of the online version, which will be in the museum. The museum is currently closed to the public, of course. When it is safe to open, we will have that exhibit in the museum as well. And I just would say, because we were talking about educational outreach to policymakers and the public, please consider how you might use this exhibit as a resource. We hope that it can spark policy conversations. It also could be used to spark conversations in classrooms, in places of worship, in different communities. So I encourage people to share this and use it as a launching pad to talk about the broader issues, about how genocide is a process and about how specifically the Rohingya community has been impacted. I'm just going to leave it there for now, but I'd be happy to take any questions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for that. And it's a brilliant exhibition. I hope to see it in real life sometime soon. It's haunting, definitely. Our next panelist is Matthew Smith, who's the Executive Director of Fortify Rights. And he's going to be speaking on next steps for rights and accountability, particularly when it comes to the ICJ and Facebook, what is going on with Facebook currently. Thank you, Matthew, for being here. Matthew is, I'm going to read, he's the co-founder and chief executive of Fortify Rights, a human rights organization based in Southeast Asia that supports human rights defenders and investigates human rights violations, combining 2 commonly separate areas of the human rights movement. Fortify Rights was the 2018 recipient of the George E. Joseph Prize for its extraordinary work to protect survivors of mass atrocity crimes and holds perpetrators accountable in Burma. Matthew himself was a 2014 Echoing Green Global Fellow and previously worked with Human Rights Watch, Earth Rights International, and with Kerry Kennedy, president of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. His work focuses on exposing genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, multi-billion-dollar corruption, and other violations. He's written for the New York Times, for the Time magazine, and is really well known and respected. For those of you who don't know about Matthew, he is a personal hero of mine. You know, one day we'll get to Matthew's level. So thank you so much, Matthew, for being here.
Thank you so much, Hena. Thank you for the generous introduction and very kind words. I really appreciate that. It's wonderful to see you today. It's wonderful to see you, Schwe, Maung, and Andrea, and to hear about all their great work. I really appreciated some of Hena's remarks before we started this about focusing on what's hopeful for the future. And I noticed that in sessions this morning, that was another theme. So with respect to that, I thought I'd just sort of recap the proceedings at the International Court of Justice in that lens. So in November 2018, the Gambia opened a case to punish genocide against Rohingya. Some of us were there in The Hague for the hearings in December, during which the Gambia requested the court to issue provisional measures of protection.
Matthew, we're having a little bit of problem hearing you.
State Council to stop my video.
Yeah, I think that would help if you can stop your video, and so that might help.
Okay, can you hear?
Yes, that's a little bit better.
Oh, okay. During the proceedings at the ICJ, State Councilor Suu Kyi and her government's legal team essentially opposed the request for provisional measures and denied any genocide occurred or is occurring. Notably, Suu Kyi only used the word Rohingya in reference to ARSA, the American Rohingya Salvation Army. So her denial of the existence of Rohingya as a group was on full display, and this surely did not help her case. Her message was essentially that the government is dealing with an armed conflict, that it's an internal affair, and that the court should respect complementarity. In other words, she's pleading with the court to allow justice in Myanmar to run its course, arguing that the court was overstepping. She cited an investigation by her government-appointed independent commission of inquiry, and she claimed it had gathered more firsthand information than any other fact-finding body. Those of you who are familiar with this commission know it was a very sad display of whitewashing. Thus far, it's only published a summary of its final report, and essentially it conceded that some Myanmar army attacks on civilians constituted war crimes, possibly constituted war crimes, but they argued that those crimes were conducted, quote unquote, haphazardly and were not evidence of the crime of genocide. So the final report has not been released publicly. The methodology has been highly discredited, as Tun Kin mentioned this morning. It's noteworthy, I think, that this commission was the 8th that was created by Myanmar to look into the situation in Rakhine since 2012. Initially, these commissions impressed members of the international community, or at least enabled the international community to look the other way. Often we would hear things like, let's wait and see how the government handles this. But I think on a positive note, thankfully, many governments are no longer accepting these commissions as signs of progress. They're seeing them for what they are, which is essentially a delaying tactic. Also, with regard to the Commission's claim that violations may be war crimes but not genocide, Naypyidaw attempted the same strategy at the ICJ, where Suu Kyi herself acknowledged that some of the violations in Rakhine may have constituted war crimes, but not genocide. Some onlookers have suggested this was a breakthrough moment, the first time the government had ever acknowledged possible war crimes. But if we consider that the government only invoked the possibility of war crimes in an attempt to deny genocide, I think it's hardly a breakthrough at all. In our opinion, it's more of an ironic, cynical ploy to avoid accountability. But back to the ICJ case, there are 17 judges presiding over it. 15 of them, those judges are full-time. Both parties to any case at the ICJ can appoint a judge to sit on the panel. So one judge was appointed by Myanmar and one was appointed by the Gambia. On January 23rd, the ICJ unanimously indicated 4 legally binding provisional measures to protect the rights of Rohingya. This was an extraordinary, but also that it was unanimous. The fact that it was unanimous means that the judge from China, as well as Myanmar's own appointed judge, voted in favor of the provisional measures. So the judge that Myanmar itself had promoted, or had appointed rather, voted against Myanmar's interests with respect to the provisional measures. With respect to the measures themselves, there are 4 of them. The first calls on acts of. The second is that the government must ensure that the military and anyone acting under its direction, influence, or control must prevent the destruction of evidence and must preserve evidence related to genocide. And fourth and finally, Myanmar must submit a report to the ICJ every 6 months detailing its progress in implementing the provisional measures. Adding on to the positivity of the court's decision to issue these provisional measures, on January 22nd, in a show of solidarity from within Myanmar, more than 100 organizations in the country issued a statement welcoming the ICJ case, as well as efforts by the International Criminal Court. Their statement didn't get too much attention, but it recognized that these cases are steps to protect all people of Myanmar and will aid the country. They were recognizing that these cases will aid the country in achieving democracy, rights, and justice. This statement was reminiscent of public statements issued by Myanmar community-based organizations back in 2016. Back then, they were calling for the establishment an independent UN-appointed investigator. The CSOs issued in 2016 actually helped nudge UN member states to vote in favor of the resolution that created the UN fact-finding mission. And I think this is noteworthy moving forward because it indicates that the efforts of human rights defenders, organizations, community-based organizations can have an impact. And also these shows of solidarity for the Rohingya demonstrate that the dominant narrative is inaccurate. Not everyone in Myanmar despises or rejects the Rohingya. There are beacons of hope, and many have been outspoken at great personal risk. Just in closing here, I'd like to touch on Facebook. In June, some of you may have seen that the Gambia filed an application in US federal court seeking information from Facebook to aid its case against Myanmar at the ICJ. Specifically, the Gambia is looking for documents and communications belonging to or controlled by specific Myanmar military officials whom the company banned. Facebook had banned them. It's also, the Gambia is also seeking information from accounts that Facebook took down and preserved. The Gambia is also seeking documents related to Facebook's internal investigations into the misuse of its platform. So, you know, what did the company know about how the platform is being misused? What led it to make its decisions, etc. And the Gambia, lastly, is looking to have a deposition of a relevant Facebook executive. So all of this information could help prove Myanmar's genocidal intent. In an extraordinary but unsurprising move, last week, Facebook filed its opposition to the request, essentially refusing to provide any information. I mention this because right now I think public pressure against Facebook is very important, and I think could be very helpful for this case and other cases that will come in the future. The company is claiming that it, quote, had to file the opposition in order to prevent, quote, a dangerous precedent. I think this is profoundly cynical. The company is essentially trying to suggest that it is refusing to share evidence of genocide in an attempt. It's perverse, it's absurd. I think it's morally appalling. The company is also claiming that it's working with the IIMM to provide evidence. This is the mechanism that was finding mission to collect evidence, the information to the IIMM. The IIMM has been waiting, my understanding is the IIMM has been waiting for more than a year to receive information from Facebook. And so I had recently mentioned to a Facebook executive that there could be two headlines. The first headline would be that Facebook helped prosecute genocide and ushered in a new era in which states can't expect the company to protect them from prosecution. The second headline is that Facebook obstructed a genocide investigation and perpetrators now roam free. So the company has some decisions to make, and I think I'm already over my time here. So so I'll leave it there. And once again, thank
Well, that exactly, just that. There could be two headlines, and this is something that perhaps let's start the discussion based on that. What can we do as advocates right now to keep that pressure going on Facebook? I noticed Simon Belinez has dropped an action item on to put pressure on Facebook, and as we go back, we realize it took Facebook more than 1,400 days to act on taking down its genocide, the genocidal posts and posts that created hate in Burma. So Schwe Maung, you were in Burma at that time while this was going on. Can you pinpoint to us what you witnessed on Facebook, how it has been a source of a tool for anti-genocide work, but then has been a tool for genocide? We'll need to unmute you. Yes, go ahead now.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, two things. We have a lot, so because of time limit, let me share 2 points. First, the president office spokesperson Uzo Te was publicly telling and sharing on his Facebook and Twitter that Muslims are burning their home themselves. But later on, we figured it out. So those women who are burning the houses, they are not Muslim. The government hired some Hindu women from Maung Township to create that story. It means they want to hide the crimes what they committed. That is one issue. And secondly, I read myself a post of Senior General Maung, who is still military chief. They said they need to go ahead with the unfinished business about these Bengali people. So when we read that post, we understand that that unfinished business is to finish Rohingya people from their ancestral land, which is an instigatory what for cleansing of Rohingya and for the expulsion of Rohingya from their motherland. So that is what happened in 2017. I think these two are very significant ones. We have many more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Andrea, I'd like to ask you, as we talk about Facebook, and sometimes, public pressure on administration of Facebook the corporate office hasn't worked so much. Do you think we should go after stockholders next?
Well, I think Matt and Schwe Maung explained the problem well. I think there are a number of solutions, and I'm probably not the best place to examine what those different solutions are. I think from an educational perspective, I think it's important to know how hate speech feeds into the process of genocide. And so I think Facebook and other social media companies, in this case, mostly Facebook, have an obligation to examine their role and to take affirmative steps to prevent their platform from being used to foment hate and even incite genocide in the future. I can think of a number of different activities and strategies, and I would defer to the community who might be best placed to advance which particular strategy would work the best for them.
Matthew, you've worked on this, and you brought Facebook up. What are some of your suggestions for those of us listening, those of us who do advocacy work, who are in the grassroots, who might be listening? What are some of your tips for them?
Thanks, Hena. Well, we've recommended directly to the company a number of things. For starters, the Gambia is set to file what's called its memorial in late October with the ICJ. That will essentially be the Gambia presenting all of the evidence it's collected. And so Facebook should urgently share information. Firstly, it should reverse its opposition to the Gambia's request in US court. It's trying to hide behind US law in concealing evidence of genocide, and it shouldn't do that. So it should share information. The company's claiming it will cooperate with the IIMM, and we've recommended they urgently share information with the IIMM, which could then in turn be shared with the Gambia. And on top of that, this is a company that made more than $50 billion last year. So if I were the head of Facebook, what I would do is hire some of the world's best prosecutors who can help the company look through information that it has preserved and determine what is most actionable for the prosecution of mass atrocity crimes. And right now, I think the company, they've told us they're considering those possibilities, but right now the company is just dragging its feet. I think we can expect more delay tactics. It's clear to me that the company is more concerned with its profits in Southeast Asia than with promoting human rights and preventing genocide. And it can change course. It can still change course, but unfortunately, we're not seeing that.
So next question is from Adam. We haven't seen the discussion on the US elections too much so far. And he was wondering what could be done to ensure that next Congress and the next administration will both promote a genocide determination and be able to move sanctions and other legislation. Now, we realize that it was under Obama that the sanctions were lifted, and honestly, what I've heard from advocates, activists, that people are scared of Democrats coming back in for this particular issue, because things actually started moving forward a little bit under this administration, the Republican administration, versus under a Democratic administration. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that, the three of you. Andrea, would you like to go first?
Well, I'll just weigh in because I think it's really important to connect the US election and the election in Myanmar and Burma, which are happening at the same time. And I just want to, when we think about genocide prevention and some of the future risks, I mean, Rohingya who are still in Burma face the ongoing risk of genocide. And the US election has a way of kind of taking all the air out of the room and really capturing media attention from around the world. And it will be, I think, what everyone, American or not, are really focused on. So I would just caution everyone who's concerned about this case to make sure that we are not losing sight of risks of acts of violence, of worrying developments in Burma around the elections and in the immediate aftermath. I think the elections could be a time, at least in the US, when we're focused on domestic issues, which of course is very natural. But I think if there's a way to make sure that the spotlight remains on populations at risk during that time would be essential. And then to your question about changes in administration, potential changes in approach, I think that's why it's all the more important to have very clear benchmarks about what progress would mean, what genocide prevention means, because any government, in Burma, in Myanmar, and in the US can, I think have rhetoric about how they are promoting prevention or how they are supporting human rights. But I think having very clear ground rules for things like citizenship and different demands from the Rohingya population about the ability to run for office and participate in public affairs, about lifting restrictions on freedom of movement and access to healthcare. These are issues that have been demands from the Rohingya population and their allies for so long. I think having very clear benchmarks would help make sure that there's a concrete sense of what progress would look like, no matter the administration.
Thank you for that. Benchmarks are definitely something. And what would those benchmarks be, Maung? That would be something that we'd like to, you perhaps to answer. What would those benchmarks look like for a incoming US administration?
Yeah, since I arrived US in 2015, I have been working with Foreign Affairs Committee of US House. So especially with the former chairman, Honorable Ed Rice. So it's very helpful. So even that Foreign Affairs Committee of the House was able, to adopt a resolution at the House that the atrocity and crimes against humanity happen against Rohingya in Burma is a genocide. This is a significant achievement, but the Senate has not yet approved that one. But again, in this current Foreign Affairs Committee, we have another hero, is Congressman Brett Sherman. I'm very close to him. So both former chairman and the current committee member, Congressman Brett Sherman, they are focusing for the protection and safety of Rohingya. Because we need to consider about the option B. If Myanmar government doesn't listen international community for the protection and the safety of the Rohingya, what is the next? These two honorable congressmen, we are talking about this next level, which is we need to have a safer place inside our motherland Arkan state. We call it safe zone. So that is in terms of Congress. But in terms of administration, as far as I have been working, dealing with State Department, the policy is very good. I'm confident State Department has enough information, evidence, what happened against Rohingya. But I understand still US administration has not yet declared the atrocity as genocide. Hopefully, I think it's within a situation. So also I expect in this forthcoming election in November 2020, US election, there will be more congressmen and also new administration will have focus on our issue. So I'm very confident about that. So I can talk about administration only about that. So I cannot explain about more about the US administration policy because they have their own policy, what they will do in the future or near future.
Matthew, so Shwe Maung talked about safe zones, and we've heard this term used, explained. Many Rohingya ask for it. What does safe zone mean to you? What does it look like to you? Is it something that is achievable?
Thanks for that. Well, I was hoping to say a word about a possible Biden presidency, but I'll hold off on that. But I think that a safe zone, I completely understand where Rohingya activists, human rights defenders in Rohingya in Rakhine and in the camps would be calling for a safe zone. It does make sense. My only concern with the prospect of a safe zone is mass atrocity crimes have been perpetrated in places, Srebrenica for one, where places that were deemed a safe zone. And I think the real key for progress particularly in Rakhine and in northern Rakhine state is a restoration of the rights of the Rohingya. A safe zone would essentially, cordon off certain areas where the Rohingya are living. I think what's really needed would be, restoration of full citizenship rights, which would require an amendment to the citizenship law, accountability for atrocities, restoring freedom of movement, basic fundamental human rights. These are the things that I think would essentially create what people have in mind when they think about safety. But a safe zone in and of itself, I'm not sure would actually work in that way.
So, okay, and I'm going to get back to Biden, but I'd like to ask both of you, all three of you, this. When we talk about the elections, or the Burmese elections are coming up, and what we've seen around the world, unless there is military intervention, the change has to come from within the country. That there have to be enough people who want that for the Rohingya people, who want them to be able to live with peace and dignity and basic human rights from within Burma. You alluded to some of those signs of hope, Matthew. What can you pinpoint, and Andrea and Maung, can you pinpoint somewhere where we can see that hope too, from perhaps the monks of the Saffron Revolution, from new people running for these elections, or is it just going to be a repeat of the past? I didn't say this was going to be easy.
Yeah, Andrea, you want to go first?
Sure. It's a good question. I think, it's such a dire situation, and I think it's helpful to look at those points of light, as you mentioned. I think finding, there are many points of solidarity amongst other ethnic leaders, as was mentioned before, with the Rohingya people. And I think countering this, I'd say, more general perception internationally that all people in Burma, Myanmar, oppose the Rohingya. I think finding ways to uplift those voices. I'm thinking about the history of the Holocaust and the history of other mass atrocities. Oftentimes, people are not, they're not merely bystanders. They're not perpetrators or victims. There's an entire continuum of people. There are people who are upstanders and who, speak out for persecuted people, even if they're not from their own community. And I think finding ways to highlight those stories, and there have been some over the past several years from a number of different ethnic communities, highlighting those stories, I think might, give other people the freedom to make those kinds of choices as well. And when we think about what might inhibit people from making those choices, I think then it comes back to hate speech and how chilling an environment social media can be. Looking at the kinds of responses people get if they were to show solidarity, and then having, I think, more of a responsibility of these platforms in making sure that they aren't chilling otherwise, people from being upstanders and expressing their compassion, their concern for their fellow countrymen.
Maung, would you like to?
Yeah. Yeah, in this regard, I would like to highlight again. Actually, we Rohingya people want to live on our ancestral land very peacefully, side by side, together with our brothers and sisters of the Rakhine community. But according to history, what Myanmar government is doing is they are playing, you see, among these two communities. Sometimes they favor Rakhine, then they oppress Rohingya community. Sometimes they favor Rohingya community and they ignore the Rakhine community. But now it is more, you see, crystal clear now in this time, the Myanmar government is not favoring any community. It means Rohingyas are under persecution. The genocide happened in 2017. Even now, our, you see, brothers and sisters of the Rakhine community, they are under persecution now. So in this regard, what we Rohingya and the Rakhine leaders realize that it is time to be united and to speak for another and to live side by side peacefully. That is what we want. I saw a lot of signs from a number of Rakhine leaders, you see, for this peaceful coexistence, especially from the yesterday roundtable meeting. But the problem is what Myanmar government will do. In this week, from I think August 12 to 14, there's a Union Peace Conference. In this 21st century Pelong Union Peace Conference, Rohingya were never included, but Rakhines are also not included in this time. So it means we both communities are suffering. We are not safe. We are first time unsafe together. So if this is situation, of course, we have been outcrying, you see, to international community to solve our problem. So international community has reached so much. So now I would like to highlight the three pillars of response to protect, in which Myanmar is a signatory, because the whole world leaders agree with 2005, these are 2P principle. So as all we are aware, according to pillar one, I mean, Myanmar is responsible to protect all their citizens, including minority groups. Myanmar failing. Pillar 2, international community needs to help Myanmar so that Myanmar government could give enough protection and safety. That looks like also failed. Now we are at the stage of pillar 3. But pillar 3 is very unclear. Still, I don't understand what is the message, what is the written exactly. They said international community response with the appropriate technique. So whatever the technique, I would like to mention that now it is time to think about that pillar 3. So in that sense, if we Rohingya and Rakhines, both communities are unsafe, so we are dying on our own land. So how long we need to wait? What international community will do more? I think now is done more than enough. So this is why I have been talking about this safe zone. Safe zone is not the first option. This is option B or C. Our first option is, of course, I fully agree, our government must restore our all rights, our government, Myanmar government is responsible to give full protection and to treat equally every ethnic minority. But in reality, it's not happening. So now we need to think about option B. It's not what we want, but situation is telling, push into that situation. So in that sense, what I highlighted is a safe zone or a safe place, because our land is unsafe and unprotected. So people are not born to be killed by Myanmar military and local security forces. That we, Rohingya and Rakhine, are same people, we have same dignity as all other human beings in this world. So this is why, so we have been talking about safe zone. Also, I understand some organizations, some leaders, they are also have some worries about the safe zone, because in safe zone situation, we have a lot of negative scenario. But the thing is, we are already in the very bad situation. So this is why, so we need to think about this option B and the safe zone or safe place. So if we talk about that, if we step up this action, then maybe Myanmar government will come forward. So we'll have a solution. So in this regard, you see, so also I expect international community from in the forthcoming U.S. Congress and U.S. administration, so they can do this thing or implement efficiently, effectively.
Matthew, you wanted to talk about a possible Biden administration and what Burma policy would look like under a Biden administration.
Yeah, thanks, Hena. Well, I think that if the Trump administration, if Secretary Pompeo fails to issue a genocide determination, despite all that that the State Department has to consider, in the event that, and there are ifs here, but in the event that Biden wins the election, I would fully expect to actually do a course correct on the Rohingya situation, because as you pointed out, the Obama administration prematurely lifted sanctions, and I think granted the Myanmar military too much, too soon, disastrous consequence. And so I think they're going to have to, I would fully expect a Biden administration and to make the appropriate changes and to move forward with a progressive approach to this, which also, I think one thing the Trump administration is famously opposed to the International Criminal Court. President Obama also did not ratify the Rome Statute. Perhaps a Biden administration would, but that would be another area that I think would be important to press upon.
So should we, is this something all of us who are concerned about this, all of us who are working on this issue should be, at the end of this conference, perhaps some next steps, right, to be working on the incoming administration, not only just obviously educating those who are running for office and might never have even heard of the word Rohingyas. There's several new people who are, running and winning primaries. So educating them, but also the expectation that human rights organizations, activists, or advocates have of this incoming, making a Burma platform, perhaps, on what we expect from this incoming administration. Would this be something that perhaps those of us who are here and working and would perhaps agree to, and pushing that out towards the incoming, whoever comes in next? Would, what would a Burma platform look like? Andrea?
Well, I think it's really important to have very clear expectations that are driven, I think, from the Rohingya community and from other communities in Burma. I think having a consultative process to develop what those, what that platform could look like, I think is a great idea. And I think just being very clear in messaging to the next administration, whether it's a Biden administration or a second Trump administration, to acknowledge that this would be a time to reset policy, to address past errors, and to have a new vision for what US Burma policy can look like. And I think that's doable no matter which administration we would have in the coming years. I think having the kind of clear, I mentioned before benchmarks, but having some kind of a clear platform that's, again, consultative and has, I think, some general concepts that different communities can agree upon, I think would be essential. And also making sure that they take into account the political and practical realities that any administration is going to face, I think would make sure that that platform is taken very seriously, and having items that are as practical as possible, I think would increase the chances that they're acted upon.
And so at this point, I'd like to ask the audience if anybody has any more questions. We have about approximately 25 more minutes left to the rest of this, the conference. So any suggestions for next steps, any things that you would like, that we haven't addressed throughout the day that would like to be addressed, please do drop that in the chat box or in the Q&A, and we'll take it to our audience. So in all of this so far, as we've been, even yesterday's roundtable was a really amazing step towards solidarity between ethnic groups, and we'll see where that goes. What else can the diaspora do, perhaps, that you haven't seen being done? If I could ask the three of you that question. That's something that, we're really pleased to see so many more Rohingya voices speaking up, so many more Rohingya youth voices speaking up, as well as Kachin and Karen voices, youth voices that we hadn't heard before. Matthew, Andrea, Maung, what else can the diaspora be doing that is not being done yet? Matthew, would you unmute you?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Thank you. I've been really inspired by the work of Rohingya women in the diaspora and in Myanmar. And there has been some very inspiring support for Rohingya women from Rohingya men. But I would like to see, a more robust support. Rohingya women are doing extraordinary work in a number of different contexts, whether it's, the refugee communities in Malaysia or the camps in Bangladesh, justice and accountability, a number of areas. And I would like to see more support for Rohingya women moving forward. But beyond that, I think the Rohingya community overall, its activists within the community, Schwe, Maung, and some others have really demonstrated, and I know, it's essential to continue to listen to Rohingya community members and members of the diaspora and others. There was this, for a long time, there was this mistaken notion that the Rohingya diaspora was disconnected from Rohingya in Rakhine State or Rohingya in the camps. And I even heard this from some diplomats in Yangon. And it was a way that people in positions of power would justify ignoring the diaspora. And thankfully, it's never been true, but thankfully, I think more people in positions of power are realizing that there is one Rohingya community, and that people are working together across borders. And I think that's been a really wonderful trend to see.
Schwe, Maung?
Yeah. Thank you, Matthew, for your comments. But actually, what I see in Rohingya and other ethnic minority diaspora in diasporas are they are working hard. See, they are really doing their jobs. I appreciate that. But as per your question, Sister Hena, what I have not seen is a collective voice of all ethnic minorities of Burma. So we have Rakhine, Karen, Kachin, and Rohingya, and each minority group has a number of organizations. So what I notice is all community leaders are leaders representing their ethnic people is based on organization. So let me talk about my Rohingya community rather than other minority groups. So first of all, I want to request that what I talks about is constructive way, positive way for better and efficient advocacy. So Rohingya community leaders, especially Rohingya leaders from all organizations, they need to have a collective voice. For what I have been working now very seriously for last 2 to 3 months is now very progressing. I believe very soon we will have a collective voice. Similarly, I want to have the collective voice of our brothers, Rakhine, Karen, Kachin, and etc. So according to our roundtable meeting yesterday, we, a number of organizations representing the ethnic minorities of Burma, agreed to form a network group. So from that network group, after a brainstorming session, I hope we will be able to form an organization which can advance our all ethnic issues with momentum. So if we do separately, our advocacy effort will be very weak, and it's very difficult to achieve our respective goals. So also, I am very positive, but as of now, it's not yet happened. But let me conclude saying we have already a seed of that growth yesterday. So I hope I'm very hopeful starting from next month meeting. So we have a unified network group which can advance our rights. In that group, I think not only the Rohingya, all ethnic will have a united voice. So that will be the most important voice regarding our human rights violation in Burma. So that we are very hopeful, but as of now, it not yet happened. But I think it will happen very soon. I'm very confident.
Thank you for that. Andrea, would you like to say something? We do have other questions in the chat.
I think it's been well said. I would just say, I know the question was about the Rohingya diaspora. I think the diaspora and activists have been doing a great job. Just to point out that they're up against a lot, and that changing policy requires so much dedication, which the community has, but a lot of time as well. The force of inertia is strong when it comes to policy. So just to say that if there are frustrations, that it's often not on the side of diaspora and on activists, that some of these mountains are hard to move.
Do you think there should be more of what Tunkin has done in Argentina? Should there be more cases like that being filed across the world in places where they're able to file those cases? Is that a positive step? Is that something that more should be doing? Matthew, if you'd like to take that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think the initiative by Tunkin and his organization and Tomas Quintana and the others in Argentina is really important, and I do think that more universal jurisdiction cases should be filed. I think it should be done carefully and with a clear understanding of how it would complement the ongoing accountability mechanisms that are already activated. But yes, I think the short answer is I think it's very important to develop a whole constellation of accountability efforts.
Thank you for that. So one question is, this is the kind of like out of the box thinking perhaps that we need more of, is can a new model of citizenship be possible in Burma with citizenship based on place of birth, not on ethnicity? Shimon?
Yeah, it is a big question. I think if we talk about citizenship based on birth, what is a practice worldwide, but in our country, it is not happening. According to former immigration minister, so he said the 1982 citizenship law was prepared based on blood, not based on birth. It means they want only to recognize 135 ethnics of Burma, which they did not include Rohingya, Pathi, and other important minority. So while my meeting with President Obama on November 14, 2014, also I discussed this issue because the citizenship card, what we are using in Burma, they're emphasizing the religion and ethnic name. So when they write ethnic and religion name, that citizenship card is become like a license to discriminate religiously and racially. So instead of doing that, if Myanmar government want to implement a new format of citizenship card, not new type of citizen, new card system. According to Myanmar Immigration Act and 1982 citizenship law, it's not necessary to write the religion and ethnic name on their respective cards. An ID, name, place of birth, date of birth, and address and gender, that should be enough. So when we have this kind of standard uniform ID card, so there will be, you see, less room to discriminate citizen racially and the religiously. So it's very good idea, but the thing is, it depends on the willingness of Myanmar government as well as Ministry of Immigration in Myanmar. They said they want to introduce a smart card which will not include race and religious name, but it's not happening as of today. Hena, I don't hear you. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you. Andrea, in your work in the Burma's lawyer count as a fellow with the Burma Lawyers Council, what what would your reply to be to this suggestion? How hard is it? Where all I'm just trying to understand what the mechanism would be like. And I understand, as Schwe Maung had said, there needs to be a will by the government, but is there a mechanism for it?
Well, I mean, I can only speak on behalf of the Holocaust Museum, not Burma Lawyers Council, but I mean, is it possible? Yes, it would require amending the citizenship law. So yes, it's possible, but it would have to follow the legislative process. And there would be nothing kind of beyond that, or no, other process required. But I mean, changing a law would creating any kind of law would require political will, which, as Schwe Maung has said, there really hasn't been a lot of advancements since. So if we think about what's possible, sure. I mean, it would be possible legally, process-wise. There's no kind of new system that would have to be created or anything like that. But creating the political will for something like this is, I think, would be quite enormous, knowing that my fellow panelists know much more about the situation in the country than I do. I would say, though, that when we think about genocide prevention, the issue of citizenship looms large, and that restoring citizenship by amending the law, which would be the way to do it, is the key way to prevent genocide in the future. And I know there are concerns about Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh being able to return home. I mean, they will not be able to return home to a place where they are unsafe and where they face the risk of genocide. So some pretty serious changes need to be made within Burma in order to make the situation safe enough for them to go back. And this would be one example of something that would make that the case.
Hena, can I say one point about these important laws, legal points of Myanmar law?
Sure.
Regarding, because the citizenship issue is a big concern for our Rohingya crisis. I think depends on only willingness of government. The Myanmar president or state councillor asks immigration department, that will be done. Because according to section 42 of 1948 citizenship law, and according to section 6 of 1982 citizenship law, we are eligible for full-fledged citizenship. But the thing is, with the policy, Myanmar government is not implementing. All Rohingya submitted their citizenship application according to 1982 law in 1990, when we have first election. But the whole Myanmar, they issue citizenship card. The government did not issue, only Rohingya. So from 1990 to 2010, for the 20 years, Rohingya suffered. Actually, Rohingya were not stateless. You see, they have state. Our state is before Arkhan's kingdom and later the Myanmar, but government intentionally made us stateless. So now let me conclude. If government is willing to do, the solution is just one word, just one order from the president office or state councilor office. They need to instruct immigration department, do it. Then they can implement it. They don't need to change or amend any law with existing laws, which is 1982 citizenship law. So all our Rohingya people are eligible for full-fledged citizenship. But the problem is they are not willing. So there also the format of, to change the format of the citizenship card is, we don't need to pass a law at the parliament. Also, this is it can be done by the immigration department internally. They don't need a separate legislation from the parliament. They can do it. But as I said earlier, willingness is very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that update, Maung. We have one final question. What is your strategy to empower Bangladesh's government to assist Rohingya refugees in getting back to their homeland? Matthew, would you like to take that question?
Sure, thank you. Well, I think the government of Bangladesh has done a lot of really important work in the area of accountability and justice. Cooperating with the Gambia, cooperating with the Office of the Prosecutor at the ICC is absolutely essential. Obviously, the fact that Bangladesh has sheltered more than 1 million Rohingya, I think is essential. It was mentioned earlier today, though, that we can't overlook the shortcomings of Bangladesh's policies with regard to the Rohingya, just because they've sheltered Rohingya, just because they're part of the effort to achieve accountability. And so, yeah, I think I agree with that. And I think that Bangladesh's response is mixed. They're doing some really important, fantastic things. And then Bangladesh security forces are also routinely violating the rights of Rohingya. And so I think that
Oh, we lost your voice a little.
A lot of work with members of the Rohingya community in the camps, and also the issue of Basan Char, I think, is quite serious, and anything can be done to but I'm not sure if my connectivity is working here, so maybe I'll just leave it there.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Well, we are wrapping this session up, and we have, I'd like to ask if Imam Mujahid is on the line, if he could come in, and Adam Carroll, our organizer, who has, he's our team lead for the Burma Task Force and has organized this entire conference, if they would like to come in to perhaps just say a few parting words and wrap this up, inshallah. From my end, a lot of food for thought, a lot of, some of the things that we discussed today will help us set our DC policy. We'll be discussing that, especially with elections coming up, both in Burma and in the United States. So thank you all from my end. And I'd like to, I see Imam Mujahid is here.
Thank you so much, Hena, and good to see so many colleagues right there. Thank you. I was listening and thinking and taking notes of the wisdom which you all have shared. I'd like to say thanks to Adam. It must have taken you extraordinary effort to put together a multi-ethnic discussion roundtable yesterday evening and all these programs, which I get to see a lot of people who I love to meet once again, hopefully. So thank you so much for this effort. I think one of the suggestions I will have is whoever has access to Biden and his forthcoming administration, if he wins, is adopt Elizabeth Warren's suggestion. She wanted to put a human rights expert in trade negotiations, whether it's Burma, its neighbors, it's China, or India. I think this is one suggestion which might take US forward when it comes to foreign policy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you also. I don't have anything more to add to Imam Malik's thank you. But I hope that this will help, and that going forward, we can have perhaps scale up our level of communication and coordination, and so much work to be done. And again, there will probably be some activities around the 3rd anniversary. We have an online rally that we're doing on August 22nd, and we're happy to partner with any organization so that we can make this a global event. So thank you.
Peace. Salam.